can follow the yellow brick road all the way to Wonderland. Mixing two stories there deliberately. The yellow brick road that leads you to Wonderland. That's the way it
Yep.
goes. The mushroom will take you to Oz. It's just updating the myths for a new generation. So how are you guys?
We are well, very well. How about yourself?
I am wonderful. Wonderful indeed. Yeah, obviously the world is in absolute chaos, and that's a lot of fun. But other than that, I'm good. From where I come from, I've been expecting this, waiting for it. It's just been a matter of time for forever, inevitable. And now we're here. So trying my best to enjoy the show.
What is the it that you were referring to? Just so I know
I
which
guess it's a
frame of.
series of things. It's like kind of a manufactured global collapse that will lead to the rise of a one world, name it, right? One world government, one world religion, one world ideology is the end goal. It's not that black and white. Like, you're never going to go from what we've got today to that one world government overnight in any capacity, no matter what kind of force they try to pull. There's always going to be 60-40 split between people who want to do it and who don't. So be a passage of time, but that's kind of the end goal, is to weed out the people who don't, weed out that 40% of us, and build the civilization moving forward with the 60% of those who do like the idea, I suppose.
Don't get in the pods.
No,
Just
no. I've been thinking a lot about there's that quote, it's about overcoming the Xbox, and just there's a lot of new literature coming out about the addictive qualities of video games that we're just starting to catch up with now. And a lot of people have been warning about for a long time, but it's always been that excuse, oh no, it's not that bad, it's not that bad, it's not that bad. Well, it turns out it's a lot worse than a lot of other things that people are consuming, like in terms of like drugs and alcohol and the staples of addiction. Turns out that Xbox system, that PlayStation, that whichever one you've got, computer gaming, has all of the same effects on your brain amplified. And the only reason that people don't notice is the withdrawal is different. The withdrawal presents as laziness and apathy and suggestibility and things of that nature that it's not quite as severe as withdrawal from heroin or a hangover from alcohol.
yeah, exactly. Especially when you have a generation of people, or now 3 or 4 generations of people who have grown up sort of steeped in all of this. They don't know anything different. They don't have the reference points that we do, which I'm so thankful that I do. I'm so glad that I grew up in a relatively un media steeped environment. I think we had like 4 to 5 channels on TV. I took in a lot of TV when I was growing up, but I don't feel like it was really fucking with my mind like the kind of media onslaught that kids are facing these days. And then you have the aspect of social media, which of course we did not have. It's insane. I can't imagine what it would be like. I'm so glad that our kids are not that way. They are of that generation, but they are very sane and very well balanced. Our kids don't want to be on social media. So,
Well, one of them does. One of them is.
yeah, but
One of them isn't.
he's not obsessed with it, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say he is, but he keeps it very much in check. I think one of the fascinating aspects of this is how kind of the left woke movement and social media taking off kind of go hand in hand. And I think one of the reasons is because uh, in our era, we weren't fearful of taking risks or chances
Mhm.
because there were very few people who were actually doing any real degree of documentation when we went out to parties or clubs. Yeah, there were people who were taking pictures, but it was very few and far between. And I'm sure there's some bizarro pictures of me from 1984
I wouldn't say that.
somewhere in
I
someone's,
own a few.
yeah, in some somewhere. I'm certain of it. But I think this kind of hesitation and this risk aversion has come from this thing or this idea that if I do something now, it could affect my career in 20 years. And that kind of an insight we didn't have necessarily. So people were making mistakes and making decisions without really thinking of the implications of those decisions, where now we've nerfed the world for kids to this degree where they don't want to get out in the sun because they're afraid of the sun, or they're afraid of the climate or whatever, or afraid of some repercussion that could happen years from now. So I find that fascinating.
Yeah, likewise. I think it's like the cancel culture, right? Has kind of it's put a fear into pretty much all of us in a certain way, right? And for younger kids, that's a kind of boundary that you're not even supposed to have when you're a kid, right? If anyone's going to place that boundary, it should be your family, your parents, that type of person who says you can't say shit like that, right? That kind of thing, not the entirety of social media and the internet and all of that. And then
Mhm.
also other another example of something similar would be the Me Too movement, and the way that that has also gone to nerf men,
Yeah.
because now a lot of men are terrified to, approach a woman the wrong way. They were already terrified to begin with of the rejection, and now
Yeah.
they're terrified of a rejection along with consequence that is beyond their control. So yeah, there's a
Right.
lot of layers to that one.
Yeah, and then you have BLM and all of that stuff, the hyper racialization of everything, which makes different races paranoid to interact with each other in a way that might be misconstrued or taken out of context as racist or xenophobic, or it's so ridiculous. It's so fucking ridiculous.
And it's funny because with the difference between the left and the right, like BLM being an example, that kind of empowers the left to be violent and protest. And then meanwhile, if the right protests even just a little bit, they're extremists and
Yeah.
violent extremists on top of that, despite the fact that that's not even really there. Like we have the media staging film ops with just two signs saying right-wing extremists. It's like you
Yes.
paid those people to be there. You made them
Exactly.
their signs, and there's nobody else around them because the actual people of that protest don't agree with those two people holding those signs. But the control of the narrative, now that we're into social media and everybody's got a cell phone, we can record things ourselves. It's almost like the spin needs to be even more absurd, right? Even more blatant, if you will. But it's what fascinates me is that people are still buying it as if that's not the case.
Mhm.
Well, I think there's this tyranny of the oppressed that's happening, where we're now fighting for who is the most oppressed in the oppressed Olympics. And so social media is great for that, because you can be just perpetually offended. You can just all day long you can find reasons to be offended or hurt, or made to feel uncomfortable or in some way. And if you have 1% of the population that's controlling the narrative for the other 99%, then you have a very skewed perspective of reality. So the assumption that all people are dot, 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 or all men are this way, or all women are this way, is very easy to get kind of caught in that eddy, because that's really what we're being um the overarching narrative that we're being told is what this one small group is saying is reality. So then if you have no experience out in life and you can't really gut check any of that stuff, then you start to think, oh, that is reality because, Kanye told me so, or, Kardashian told me so. And so that has to be real.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have probably caught wind of some of because the NFL and the Taylor Swift connection, the
Mhm.
stuff that's going on there, and the absolute hoopla. That's proof of
Yeah.
what you're saying right there, right? Like it's like the best example, and I feel like that's a lot of where we're at these days. Is all of these things that we've kind of known are right there in a very cartoonish form right in front of our face. And going back to when they put Trump in office the first time, I said like that was kind of what they were doing was like, oh, you guys want to see absurd? Well, let's make this man the president. That's absurd. Oh, that wasn't absurd enough for you. Well,
Yeah.
then enter, a man with dementia. And I don't know if you guys caught the latest one where he had his diaper hanging out while he's addressing the media. And,
Yeah.
but it is absurd and it's meant to be, right? It's meant to do that. And then the fighting between the left and the right, especially in the United States, Canada is following it, right? It's really quite funny. I had said in a podcast I did around Christmas time how our next election is basically just going to be a parody of the United States election. That we've got Trudeau, who is the Biden, and we've got Pierre as the Trump figure. And it's funny because now our media is actually saying that. Our media is calling Pierre Trump, right, and talking about that. We have a new hashtag up here, which is Maple MAGA,
Oh, wow.
I love
right?
it.
Yeah, and it's all the same thing. And now the NDP and the Liberals are getting together. They got caught, but they were doing it in private to amend voting legislation in the exact same way that did. So Trudeau's going to end up winning the next election by 81 million votes. I don't think we have 81 million people in Canada, but
Doesn't matter.
doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Really, ultimately. Yeah, I think the Taylor Swift thing is very fascinating because we live in the Midwest, so we are really kind of inundated with the reality of the NFL, and the Chiefs are now in the Super Bowl, and so there's all this kind of hullabaloo around that. And I think the thing that is so interesting about that spin of that narrative is that yesterday I read in the paper that 80% of people said they would vote for whomever Taylor Swift backed.
Yeah.
So that almost sounds like a threat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it kind of sounds
It is.
like she's taking the highest bids, you know? So it's so strange that that's where we're at in terms of our national politics, that someone who, albeit a talented spin artist and a talented musician, someone who writes her own songs allegedly, you know, God bless her. I'm glad she's doing what she's doing as long as she's not hurting anybody. But the fact that she could sway an election is pretty frightening.
Yeah, there was some kind of messing with those numbers too, where it was something like I think it was the last time they said that she created this huge influx of votes, but really it was only a small percentage on top of what was already there, but they counted the whole to make that illusion, right? And then this time around they're doing that again and using her in this way because exactly for the reason you just pointed out, trying to get people to do whatever it is. And I don't think it's a real game of playing for the highest bidder, but I think it's intentionally meant to look like that as well. Probably to, potentially bait the Trump people into it
Yeah,
and
scare people into action, because anyone who doesn't like Taylor Swift is going to be like, well, what league do I need to join to make sure that whoever she backs doesn't become the president?
vice versa if you are pro Taylor Swift or one of her followers, if you will. So yeah, and then I don't know, like I remember at the time we had our election last in Canada, I was working in a long-term care facility part-time and watched them stuffing ballots in front of people with dementia and Alzheimer's, right? So I'm sure that that's going on in the States as well. And just the idea that any of it is fair to begin with is absurd.
Yeah.
And then you add on all of this, then it's, yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard about the bet between Roseanne Barr and Michael Malice as to whether or not there's going to be an election. They have a
Oh,
$1,000
No,
bet.
I
Yeah,
haven't.
yeah, they have $1,000 bet going because Roseanne says there's not going to be an election, and Michael Malice thinks that's insane, and so they have a public bet going about that. And as we get closer and closer and closer, even Michael Malice has admitted it's starting to look like she might be right because there's a bunch of different reasons that they could, let's say even election went on, like we had the proceedings, who's going to accept this, right? It doesn't really matter what happens, who's going to accept it. They barely accepted 2016, they barely accepted 2020. No one's going to accept this one, and that's been the name of the game of all of it. But it's just so interesting to watch it all play out, especially as you're getting closer to crunch time.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard these things about the illegal immigrants coming in, and um those votes being used as valid votes, and that would be the reason why a Biden administration would win. And I've also heard talks and rumors that Michelle Obama would be the candidate for the
Big Mike.
Democrats,
Mhm.
and that she has said point blank that she does not want the job because she has seen what has happened to her husband. And I think there's these gatekeepers, these old guard people that will just basically prop anyone up that will keep their agenda going. So, does it really matter who
It
wins
doesn't
at
really.
this point,
But
truly?
I think that it's important to cast it so that the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, because that's what keeps the machine turning. It's almost what keeps the clockworks running, uh, because it never could. We're never supposed to find balance. This whole system is rigged to keep people at odds with one another, or at least to give the facade that people are at odds with one another, and bring out this just ridiculous idiocracy based um, tribalism. And that's exactly what Trump and Biden was all about. Biden would have never won against anybody else except Trump. He could have ran as not Trump. Just that would have been his name, and he would have still, I mean, that would have made more sense, because that's why I
Point.
think that's the only reason people voted for him,
Yeah, all
voted.
81 million of them, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
but yeah, the case in point, going back to Bush's second term, that was when we started to see the left and right kind of switch sides because
Yes.
they had to, because things were getting stagnant. As you were saying, that pendulum needs to keep swinging. But Iraq, the first time, like and second time, I guess technically, was enough to stop that pendulum for a while, where
Mhm.
both sides were going, no, 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 like, right? And so they're like, oh, okay, well, then we'll just do one of these, and then you don't know which way to start moving, and that creates the pendulum swinging again. And the power dynamic just switched, but the ideology also changed from side to side, other
Yeah.
than the traditional stuff, or what people call trad these days, which disgusts me. But like that's the traditional morals of North America, on that side that stayed on the right, but everything else switched over to the left. All of a sudden the left wants war, all of a sudden the left wants everybody put into concentration camps and shot up with medical experiments and stuff like that. So yeah, it's exactly the reason you said, to keep that pendulum swinging.
Yes, and it's been swinging far and wide this last 3 to 5 years. I mean, ever since Trump got into office, I think is really when somebody took it and just really held it as high as they could and let it go, and then that fucker just kept swinging wildly back and forth.
Well, I just feel like people have conspiracy exhaustion. I just feel like we've come to the point. This is the even if this wasn't a a very clearly laid out plan, maybe the intended or unintended consequence has become in the past 3 years, 4 years, that there has been such a barrage of constant attack on civil liberties and freedom of speech and justice, and really the tenets and the thing that this country was founded on has been so just inundated with bullshit that I think people have just gotten to this point where they are just so exhausted by all of it. So it's almost like I don't give a fuck who wins the
Yeah.
next election. I don't care what the next disease or virus is. I don't, can we just power down for a moment and just call it equal, and just we don't do anything? Like, why can't we just not do anything for a year? I can't we just take a break from
Probably.
We
this
can.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we can.
But I'm saying, like, as a whole, like all the machines that are running right now, do we have to keep it all powering at all times? Can't we just kind of hit the pause button and say, okay, no social media for a year? No news. No, we don't need to be informed. Let's get out of the stock
Well,
market. Let's just stop.
I'm basically uninformed. I mean, you're the one, you kind of filter the world to me in little tidbits and little
I
bite-sized
know,
chunks.
because I have this inbuilt neural link that has been with me since before I was born, Even if I don't know what's going on in the news, I know something's going on.
Well, it's been interesting because of the whole pandemic bullshit, how that's really upped the polarization as far as one side being kind of lockstep with whatever the state and media is telling them, same thing, same tentacles, same octopus, different tentacles, same octopus. Uh, and the kind of this attack of seems to like a very organized attack on conspiracy, which has been just a kind of a reactionary term for questioning. So censorship, propaganda and censorship, different sides of the same coin. Like propaganda has gone ape shit. Like, and it's been highly successful. You can still see people wearing masks out in the street. They're still subject to the propaganda that happened fucking 4 years ago. And then you got the onslaught of people who, think that any sort of questioning whatsoever is you might as just risky right-wing
Right,
conspiracy
because
bullshit.
if you start there, if you start with that narrative, then you have to start examining all of these other narratives that you've bought into.
Exactly.
And you have to take a pause and say, wow, why did I vote for that person? That person is a total lunatic. Why did I get that shot? I didn't need that. Why did I get caught up? And, as one of my teachers said, the ego would rather die than change. So if we are so entrenched with our egos and it's so necessary to be right, then there will be people who go to their deathbed gripping their chest, having heart attacks, saying, I still think I did the right thing.
The calcification of echo chambers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a process in terms of like demonizing conspiracy theories that I've been talking about for longer than most people know my name, because it's been what I saw coming. And then QAnon being the kind of icing on the cake that drove all of that home and actually did make it domestic terrorists, leading to January 6th and everything else that we've seen since. Like, even in our own media, I was watching a video last night of it was a pro-Palestine protester basically jumping on Justin Trudeau's car and trying to kick in his front window, and nobody said anything really about it, right? Like, it was really only the extreme right who was sharing it at all. The media had nothing to say. Why? Because they were a pro-Palestine
Yeah.
protest. If they had been a pro-Israel Palestine, that would have protester story, that would have been everywhere, because
Mhm.
that's the way our media works, and it's just so obvious. But turning it into a crime, basically, to question, as you said, right, to have conspiracy theories to question. And then the other part of it, especially within the community we are in, is another thing I've been warning about is that something like this would happen that woke a bunch of people up and they would come into the conspiracy world,
Mhm.
but then they would find all these rabbit holes and all these traps that have been being created over the time where we've been kind of playing over here on our own little sandbox. And then
Mhm.
that'll even scare them away, right? Like, and that fear will cause them to follow lockstep on the other side. And then the other thing that they were really clever in doing was getting people in the media to demonize people who weren't taking the lollipop while that
Mhm.
was going on, because then that would cause the average everyday person to demonize people who weren't taking the lollipop, call for their deaths, say all these absurd things. They thought they were right, they thought they were right to say it, and so they did. And then when it turned out that they were wrong, you can't come back from that. You can't just be like, I'm sorry I called for your death,
Yeah.
right? Like, you've taken a step too far, so you have to continue on with that side.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're going to get thrown to the other side. And the other thing politically you're seeing is the people who fall out of favor with the left and then come to the right ends up throwing them out too for various reasons, or vice versa. And you can't really win on either side. So, yeah, it's leading to this escalation of explosion that we've got the eclipse coming up in April, and if we make it that far, I don't think we're going to make it much further before we start to see that explosion start to take place.
Yeah, I refuse to categorize myself by left wing, right wing, certainly any political affiliation, because I think it's a bunch of fucking baloney and theater. And it's really doesn't cause any real change in the world. So I have I'm apolitical for sure, but I've tried to gather my information from places where it feels right, where it feels true, no matter where that's coming from. And sometimes, it'll just be the paragraph of something that a longer essay or something that somebody wrote, or, like today, I just got done listening to, what is it? God damn it. What's the book by Robin DiAngelo? Right, White Fragility. Yes. To just see what I've heard that book referred to intensely for the last 2 years. So it's like, what the fuck is this all about? Now I know what it's all about. I can't say that I gleaned any knowledge from that book except knowing what people are pointing to now.
Well, we
Um,
have it if you want it. It's on the shelf.
Oh yeah, you got it at the library, didn't you? Yeah. It's nuts, insane. But so yeah, I think the more that we can declassify ourselves and remain malleable and open and free flowing and fluidic as far as uh, how we align ourselves with reality, I think the better off we are. Remain ambiguous.
Imagine if people started acting on the left like they actually believe all the things that they say. The world would probably be a pretty good place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it takes courage to stand up against tyranny. And I think that what we saw in the past few years is that there's a lot more people who are fragile and who don't really, and who are empaths or who are extremely sensitive people who don't have the energy necessarily to be courageous or don't feel that they do. And so they just kind of keep quiet. And you might get a private email saying, I agree with you, but they're not going to risk their career or risk being canceled themselves by standing up with someone else. And I think that's the thing that these bad actors have relied on is they've relied on other people's fragility and other people's lack of inner strength and use that
Integrity.
against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Most people don't speak up because they're afraid to, because they don't want to stick out in their group, in their echo chamber.
I can't remember, was it Huxley or the other one, the thought police? We have the thought police in place, and it's not an outside organization. It's a little voice in all of our heads that
Yes.
is like, controlling what we thought we're going to say based on how badly will this hurt me to say it.
Yeah.
And that's thought police, and that's why that's such a negative against us, is because
Mhm.
yeah, it's that type of courage that it requires to speak up when your life might be on the line is not something that we've had tested for many generations. So
No.
yeah, here we
I
are.
think that's why the pandemic was a great psyop, because we saw how many Agent Smiths could be employed in all of that. Like, it wasn't just about like there being billboards and signs everywhere, like from obvious authoritarian sources trying to get you to do something, although those were the case too. Uh, but it was mostly just your fellow citizens, the people that you lived in your town, lived down the street from you, who were doing the finger wagging and doing the shaming and doing the calling out. Quite ingenious, quite ingenious. They just planted the seeds and fucking these farmers grew some crops with that.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And then the in-betweeners, the order followers
Mhm.
have been, also exposed as a big problem. What's that gentleman's name from InfoWars? Went to jail because of Owen Owen something. He just went to jail for a little while because of January 6th, and he was talking about the guards coming up to him and like, hey, I agree with you. Sorry, I'm just doing my job, right? Fuck
Yeah.
those people. That's the way I feel about it. Like, you are a cowardly man. Quit your
Yes.
job, right?
Yeah.
Quit your job. I ran
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
ran security for a long time, and it was one thing I would teach my guards or tell my guards, and I lost a couple jobs because of this attitude. But I'm not going to enforce a law I don't respect and don't agree with, and I don't expect any of you to do that simply because you're standing in that spot. You are a
Yeah.
human being. Choose, right? If you
Yeah.
don't think that it's just, don't do it. It's simple. And
Yeah.
if you're wrong, then it's better to be wrong about not acting on something like that, right? Than it would be to do something unjust and to
Yes.
have harmed in that sense.
Agreed.
Well, I think the fear narrative is so powerful because what it's really about is about having things taken away from you. So it's an important, it's a really a crucial aspect and element to create any type of a movement is you have to create some sense of a lack. So you what these past few years could have been is a testing ground to see, okay, how many people will comply? We know that there's this group that will comply. How many people are fence riders who may or may not comply? And then who are the outliers? Who are the people who, no matter what, they're just not going to go along? And now that I think they have those numbers, it's really just doing the statistical analysis. It's easy to see, okay, so in this area, we could totally take this country over. We could totally take this region over because people are pretty compliant and they're older. They're just of a generation where you just kind of go along with what the official story is. I think that what's going on in Texas is so interesting because you see all these states, and if you look at the map of the states who are standing with Texas, all these very freedom loving, gun toting, pioneer spirit states that are saying, there's a problem and we're willing to stand with you to try to solve this problem. So I find that interesting. Again, it's like I'm always looking at the layers, like what are the reasons here? Okay, this depop, this is not the way to depop. You want to depopulate this, you could do that with a teaspoon of uranium in the water table. It's not about depopulation. This is about moving energy and seeing which way you can flow this energy and how powerful that energy is.
A big part of what they're trying to achieve is to knock the United States down as a superpower, to try and make it so that everything seems a little bit more even. They don't like this idea of having that up there, and what a better way to do that than weaken the country. So let's maybe shift the focus into the conditions that had to be created in order to make all of this possible. The dumbing down of people, like we've been talking about for years, right, through the education system, the introduction of sugars and corn syrups and enriched wheat products and a lot of other things that are really just making people unhealthy. And then, feeding them. One of the things I always say is they convinced us that perception is reality, and then they gave us all the tools to make it true. So we can actually, shape our reality based on whatever perceptions we prefer. If I don't want to interact with someone, there's a block button, right? We didn't have a block button when we were going to school and we were around people, right? You'd have to actually learn how to deal with your problems, but they don't have to do that anymore. So, um, in a more conspiracy land of where our genetics coming from, perhaps ETs. Everyone talks about the big bad Draco all the time, and I'm thinking that there's this quality that we need from them right now, and it's in there in our genetics that we're not really using, and that has to do with standing the fuck up for yourself and
Yes.
having courage and choosing a hill and dying on it. And that's the part that's been bred out of us in so many ways. And obviously the attack vector to make that happen has to be men, because men are the ones who fight the wars physically, right? So
Mhm.
that first step of emasculating men or like feminizing men and all of that stuff. I know, Hunter, that's something that you do a lot of looking into, and it's fascinated me. Part of what sparked this conversation is I did a whole month just talking about male female dynamics and relationships, and then bumped into you with Randy there, and you mentioned something very much of the same. But even that plays into it, of this like sexual playground that they've created for people these days that is a complete illusion, like pushing polyamory on one side and then like virtual girlfriends on the other side, and the Tinder component in the middle of it. And it's just this recipe where once again they're giving us what we think we want, but it's not really what we need, and it ends up working against us in a hurry.
Totally.
Yep.
I was expecting you to chime in on that, and now I've completely lost my thought.
No,
I was gonna practice and rehearse while you were
no, I
saying
think
something.
I think you make a salient point. I think there's definitely there's lots of different versions of coupling or uncoupling that have been experimented with for hundreds of years, probably as long as humans have been around. They've been trying different iterations and different versions. And I think some versions work better for men, some versions work better for women, some versions work better for children. And I think where we're at right now is we're doing things that are right for the ego, the amorphous ego, but it's not what's best for women. It's not what's best for men. It's certainly not what's best for children. And so, this kind of destruction of the family and the parent group, what that's caused, and I'm seeing it in university. It's so fascinating to see this, is this blame game that's happening of like, whose fault is it when a kid graduates college and they don't have any of the skills they need to go out and actually do a job? These employers are saying, well, it's the university skills are a problem because they're not teaching these skills. The job market is being attacked by universities who are saying, well, it's actually the job market's place because they're the ones who are supposed to teach these very specific skills when someone gets a job. And I think what, if you really kind of look down into, drill down into this, what it's really more about is parenting. And where we have failed is this idea that a woman can have it all. She can have children. She can have a career. She can have a perfect body. She can be ageless. She can be pristine in her life, be happy, have everything she wants, and she doesn't need a man to do it. So we've sold this fantasy to women, and so women are miserable because they're trying to live up to that reality. Men have kind of lost their rudderless, have kind of lost their way because there's like, what, you wait, you don't need me anymore. So what's the use of being in a relationship? So people aren't going into these next steps of having children, getting married, doing these basic life steps that for many generations we've been doing. And the replacement is certainly not making anybody happy. That's what I find so fascinating, is that you don't see a lot of super joyful transsexual people walking around the streets that are so happy. They're so happy they don't have to tell you they're transsexual. That's what I'm waiting for, that day where I see someone who is so invested in who they are, and is so embodies the joy of humanity, but does not have to lead with their sexuality or their gender.
When we were at the Chloe Cole speaking thing at KU a few weeks ago, there was one dude on that,
Mm-hmm.
the guy handing out the pamphlets. Like,
Yeah.
he was the nice, sweet guy, but all the rest of them seemed very hateful, very reactive, very emotional,
Yeah.
and just wanted to, obviously, we're not there for a conversation, but to shout down who the person was speaking. Yeah, ridiculous. But going back to what you were saying about personal integrity, I think that's so bloody important right now, and something that's so easy to lose sight of when we seem, I'm not necessarily including myself in this, but our society seems focused and almost obsessed with categorizing and grouping people into groups, whether it be by their skin color, whether it be by their gender, whether it be by their lack of gender, whatever the fuck. You get white fragility when that's what they're talking about. Anybody can show that. You put anybody in that same circumstance, of course they're going to act a little, a little what's the word I'm looking for, agitated and defensive and stuff like that. Toxic masculinity, like, that's, they're, anybody is capable of acting toxic. Why are we tagging that onto masculinity? So it takes the onus off to the individual to go, you know what, I'm not any of these things. I may be white, I may be male, I may be this, that, or the other, but that doesn't define me. My insides are much more important than any kind of arbitrary physical attribute that I have. And I think that's that's become the focus now, is just these little, like the Starbelly Sneetches of the Dr. Seuss book, you
Right.
know? Like,
Can define you, but it's not the only thing that defines you.
it may be the most unimpressive thing to
It
define
can,
you.
it would, it's probably the least compelling thing about you. But I think this idea of gender erasure or um ethnic erasure, or color blindness, I think these are very dangerous concepts, because I think that's the thing that this post-human movement is really kind of moving towards, or wants to move toward, is that we are nothing. We aren't female, we aren't male, we aren't what our culture is, we aren't what our family lineage is. None of that stuff matters. It's just we're all these kind of amorphous energies that blob and glom onto each other and then separate. So I think it's okay to say that you're a white man and to be a white man. I get so um, agitated when I hear this kind of semi apology, not from you, but from anyone who's like, well, I like almost like I feel bad that I'm this. It's like, well, fuck that. That's the overcorrection of this dialogue. It's like you shouldn't not be okay to be English or Irish or Scottish if that's your heritage.
I think the blurring of lines all leads down to, if there are no lines, then there is no right and wrong. There is no good and evil anymore, and people can just do whatever they want. The government first, and the peasants next, right? I was looking at this thing where they were following people who study critical race theory around white people who push it, right? And then they were following them and listening to the way that they speak to black people, and how they actually start dumbing down their language, and they start talking slower, and they start treating them as if they are inferior, all the while
Yeah.
Wild.
preaching the opposite, right? And that's what I mean when I say, if the left actually acted like they believed all the things that they say, the world would probably be a pretty good place, but they don't.
Mhm.
And they really just say that. And we've watched it. Like I have trans kids, and I've watched it with that community where it was like, we want this. Okay, now that we've got it, we want it to go back the way that it was, but we want to be in control now,
Mhm.
right? And that's exactly what it is. It's not like we're going to erase the way that things were. We don't really want to change the world. We just want someone else in charge of it. That's
Yeah.
really what it comes down.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I don't think I meant it like we should all become one big amorphous blob and not define ourselves in any way whatsoever, but more focusing on our similarities as opposed to our differences.
Yeah.
Most of those differences not really mattering when we focus on our similarities. We're humans. It's okay to be a transhuman or well, a trans, you know what I mean? Not a transhuman as in transhumanist, uh, a whatever. It doesn't matter. I think to lead with those attributes, I think doesn't do justice to the individual, doesn't do
Right.
justice to
But
the
it's not a microaggression or an aggression to be in a cab in New York and ask the cab driver where he's from.
yeah,
And now
exactly.
that's considered a form of aggression, that is toxic to share some type of a dialogue with someone that's about their culture is considered an act of aggression. And what I find so interesting about that is that some of the best conversations with strangers I ever had in New York was with a cab driver saying, "Oh, where are you from?" And them saying Nigeria, Cambodia, Russia, and then tell me about the food. What I would always start with is tell me about your food. What do you guys eat there? Oh, it must be really beautiful there. Tell me about the village you come from. And seeing someone from another part of the world be able to share their experience of their world and see the look that changes in their eyes and how their energy changes talking about where they're from. Why would you want to take that away from somebody? It just doesn't make sense. It's like we should be celebrating people.
Well, the counter argument comes from the kids of those people who, like the Somali guy who grew up here. And
Mhm.
maybe he doesn't like, while he's driving his Uber all during the day, having to answer the question, where are you
Yeah.
from, with the answer here, right? Like, and I can understand it from
Yeah.
them, but the people
Oh,
who actually aren't from here, they actually do enjoy that question
Yeah.
for the same reason we're enjoying asking it, which is just, what is that? Humanity. We want to actually know about our neighbors. We want to actually know about each other. That is a microaggression now. But if
yeah.
you assume everything, because we've categorized everything for you, this is what a black person is, this is how they think, this is how what they do, then you're okay. It's completely paradoxical or oxymoronic and backwards. It makes no sense, but that's the entire ideology on that side. And
Yeah.
I can remember when my oldest came out, I said right from the beginning, I'm like, I respect this thing up until the queue. And then when the queue hits, everything's going to be downhill from there. And it was only a few months after they added the queue, and everything has gone downhill since then. And yeah, it's that slippery slope that everyone warns about, but nobody wants to hear because they have the destination in mind of like what it could look like if everything went perfect. But unfortunately, in application, nothing like that ever goes perfectly. There's always going to be problems. And if you don't account for those problems ahead of time, and then while you're actually going through it, you deny their problems and fight against the people who are pointing out the problems, then you're not really achieving anything, which is exactly what pretty much all of those movements are doing for themselves, right? Like my own sister is like, I don't go to Pride anymore because it's disgusting now. And
Mhm.
she's older than me, and she's been a lesbian, or out as a lesbian, I meant to say, since she was like 13 or 14, right? So it's been her entire life now. Everything's been fine, and now things are difficult for her for being gay. And she's like, it wasn't when I was a kid, it is now. And that's what they've achieved through all of this.
Yeah, it seems like more of an aggression not to want to know about someone. That seems more aggressive. That seems more nihilistic and more self-serving, just to kind of sit in my own bubble than to actually try to have some exchange. And for me, that exchange is not trying to find a similarity, because I don't think I necessarily have something similar, like a similar story to someone that's come from a completely different background than I do. I'm more interested in celebrating that difference and understanding that difference, because I think that that's the gap bridging that needs to happen. So for me, when I'm having these dialogues about people who are transitioning, or people who have gender dysphoria, or incels, or people who have relationships with dolls, I'm not looking at that person and thinking, oh, that's just like me. What I'm trying to do is understand what has the steps that it has taken in this person's life for them to get where they're at. I'm just morbidly curious about people. So when I'm asking those questions, it's not out of an aggression, it's more out of a genuine curiosity to find out who that person is as a human. It's not really to reflect me. I know who I am. I want to know who you are. So I think that's the thing that's missing, is that, some people who are very evangelically on the right are like, I don't want you to bring this into my church or into my kids and infect my kids' minds with this. I totally get that. I don't think that we should be indoctrinating children, but I also don't think we should be isolating people. So if someone has some belief system that's different from mine, maybe I want to have that person over to my house for dinner with my kids so that we can all talk. But it doesn't mean that I'm co-signing that my kid becomes that thing because I'm introducing that energy into my space. I think what we're trying to teach the kids is discernment. Like, how do you engage with someone who's different from you without seeming like you're living in some hierarchy, like you're better than somebody else?
Well, just like we're hardwired to see the negative more acutely than the positive, it's the same thing with differences in other people. And that's where identifying the ways that we are all the same would become really important, because if we had that sameness as the foundation, the differences then are not scary, they're exciting, they're
Yeah.
um, enticing. I'm looking for another word that I can't find, but it's inviting you to find out about that, as opposed to being afraid of it, right? Whereas if you understand that you guys have like this fundamental sameness, then those differences are actually attractive than not, right? It's like if everyone wore the same uniform, the one girl who like let her shoulder hang out that one day would get noticed, right? And that's
Yeah.
why we look at differences as negatives now, because in our history they have been a negative. They've been a problem. If you have a completely different color of people come walking into your village, you're probably in for a fight, and therefore that's a bad thing. In today's society, that's no longer true. And so we can start to recondition ourselves to that. And that's where identifying that we're all human at the end of the day. Culture has played a big part. Nature, nurture, all of those things that we know has played. We were all babies and we all grew into whatever we are now. And the difference between you and the difference between me is interesting, as opposed to, you like that music, that scares me. Nobody does that. They might be like, oh well, show me some of it, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I lament the climate that is being pushed today, that lack of adventurousness, adventurousness, that doesn't sound right for some reason. Adventurousness. Um, the how we are not encouraged to poke and prod, and not in a mean way, but in a like, what's going on here? Like, what's who are you? Like you were saying, uh, and question and just test the waters in a way. Like when I was a kid during the summer, uh I would leave the house in the morning. I would come back for lunch, and I would leave again and come back for supper, and my I don't even think my mom would ever ask where I was, and we were just running around rampant in the neighborhood or the construction site that was near our house. And that was great. And now, if your kid is seen outside of your house and it doesn't seem like there's any parent or guardian near, then you could get busted for that. You could get arrested for that. And that is like, that's a very emblematic situation that sort of sums up where a lot of people are at. If they had a childhood like that and they think the world is something to fear, Jesus Christ, like, that's horrible. That's awful. To snuff that curiosity. That's that's ingenious, whoever thought of doing that, because that really changed the whole trajectory of several generations. I'm glad that I'm not one of them.
Yeah. I think it goes back to helicopter parenting, goes back to social media. Because again, you have parents who are protecting you or trying to insulate you, which teaches you that the world is a fearful place that you need to be protected and insulated from. So it's going to be much easier for you to live a fantasy world online or in a video game
Yeah.
than it is to actually go out and really test your metal and see what you're made of.
Yeah, and even just like, if you've got helicopter parents, let's say, and then you get to go online, you're going to act out of your character simply because you don't have the opportunity to act within your character under your normal circumstances. I had a friend who was like that. I met him because he was a troll on a forum back in like the early internet days when forums were a big thing, like a parachat type thing. And he would just come in and just troll people for no reason, like just be vile and disgusting and just ridiculous. And over time he ended up messaging me, and I actually met him in person, got to know him. He's a very sweet guy, but he's Muslim and he has a very strict family, and they all live in this tiny little house, and there's like 9 of them, and he doesn't ever get to express any negative emotions ever. So he takes it all out being a troll on the internet, right? And you don't think that there's probably hundreds of thousands of people like him out there doing exactly that every day? There are, right? And, uh, yeah, it's even the dynamics between I'm a male, so I can only speak on the male side. Like if my friends didn't make fun of me, I probably never would have improved. If I didn't get not necessarily bullied, but if I didn't like get slapped in the mouth for mouthing off to some kid at school I shouldn't have mouthed off to, I'd probably mouth off to everybody, right? There was a certain amount of, let's call it self-policing, or like if policing between ourselves, like a duel back in the day, or like an agreement between two individuals, that there's a line that neither one of us want to cross. If one of us pushes it and one of us crosses it, there's a penalty for that. You've paid the penalty, let's move on. But even that's been removed. Like I was still in school when they started making zero tolerance policies. And
Mhm.
like, so it was literally one of those situations, which is now in our legal system, where it doesn't matter how many times they hit you. If you hit them back, you're going to jail. Right. The Daniel Penny, doesn't matter that he was running around with a knife threatening to kill people. You choked him, he died, you're going to jail. Right. And that's exactly it. You're not even legally allowed to defend yourself anymore. Right. I remember as a kid seeing that between men and women. Very young, my parents are having a fight. My mom goes running at my dad. My dad goes like this. She hits his arms, falls down, bruises her tailbone. The police are there. He's going to jail. Just like that. Right. Like no questioning, no real even dialogue. Just she was hurt, crying, called the police. The police took him away. But now it would be, he could probably get away with smashing her around a few times, and then they would probably try and remove both of them, if anything, or they just tell them to work it out. So, yeah, they've not only, put the fear of the world into us, but they've also nerfed us so that we can't do anything to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
Fun.
Insane. Fun. Yeah, it's an interesting time to live in. I in many ways I feel I don't feel taken down by it. I feel like it's making me more robust and making me more resilient. But I know that that is not the effect that it has on a lot of people. A lot of people are taken down by it, or they're succumbing to the fear and succumbing to all of this propaganda that's coming at them from every side, and they aren't faring so well. But hopefully, that pendulum will find some balance. I don't know if that's going to happen in our lifetimes, but I think it we can't expect the big pendulum to find a balance, but we can find that balance in ourselves. I mean, really, that's what it all boils down to is how we navigate the world. Doesn't matter what cards we're dealt, doesn't matter what our circumstances are. We can usually find some way to change it and transmute it into something that uh, is positive, or at the very least, um, keeps the negativity from getting the best of us. I don't know of any other way to articulate it.
Just I don't know. I think that the fear train is so powerful that you just have to kind of step off of it every so often, because I I think right now, because I kind of go into like an energy place of like, okay, what does my energy feel about what's going on right now in this year? And so many people are saying I'm very afraid and this is a very scary time, and this election and alien invasions and all of these different narratives, another disease or another virus, all it's just fear, fear, fear. And when I kind of take a step left or right away from that, and I'm just kind of sit with myself, I think, who is benefiting from me being afraid? Who gets the maximum use of my energy for my fear, whatever degree of fear that I live with?
Archons.
And if that's the person I'm willing to dance with, if that's the energy that I need to sustain myself, to propel me forward, then uh, that may be useful for me. But right now, it just doesn't feel that way. It doesn't really seem to be serving me to be freaked out. And it's so fascinating that I'm hearing so many more people kind of using this binary, this bifurcated left right ideology. I'm seeing way more people on the left that are saying that now. I'm so afraid that Trump is going to get reelected. I'm so afraid that dot 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 is going to have this, is going to happen, that another disease or whatever. So I look at those people and I'm thinking, are you happy? Because some people are very happy being freaked out. I have people that I work in different environments with, and they just have the laundry list of the things that they're afraid of. They're afraid of homeless people. They're afraid of traffic. They're afraid of weather. They're afraid of rain. They're afraid of the ice and the streets. And it's just a constant dialogue of that being spewed. You know, the list of celebrities who are now claiming they're going to move out of the
Oh
country
my God.
if he gets elected. I'm like, can I help you pack? Please, can I help you?
Didn't they all say that the first time? But
Like several times.
Now
Time after
Cher has said it.
Cher's
Uh,
been saying that bullshit.
you know, just it's on and on and on. Barbara Streisand has said she's leaving the country if he wins. So again, it's like, what are these things serving me, and how is this making the world a better place? If, let's say, the stock market gets shut down, let's say the grid goes down, let's say the internet goes down, what are we doing in our community, in our own home? How are we elevating the energy in the space that we inhabit to make that better? It's not going to be going and knocking on City Hall's door and saying, we ain't got no power. How are you going to help us? That's not going to fix it. So I think understanding that your state is really more important than the environment around you, and really focusing on your own state. I think that's the thing we all need to kind of shift our awareness to.
Amen.
yep. And then there's another phrase, I think it's usually used in political climates, but it's about touching grass, which is the idea of like coming down out of your kind of echo chamber, or your bubble or whatever, where you're usually the people you're usually around, all of that, and getting a different look, right?
Mhm.
Going out and talking to some people in the community, or listening to, over you just listen to some conversations at a coffee shop, and then literally go out and touch grass on top of that, right? That'll resonate with our community as an example. But the idea is just to be able to take pause, right? And I said it recently, like even God rested on the seventh day, right? Where so like there's a message in that, that you can't go 100% all the time that way, especially if it's in this particular realm. And you're very correct, and I think it's a bigger epidemic than people even realize, because we think that people get addicted to good feelings, but if you've ever done any of the drugs that people get really addicted to, most of the feelings associated aren't really good. And they're just as addicted to that death that comes along with their drug as they are to the high that they got off the top. And unfortunately, that's true for fear as well. There are a lot of people out there who are very addicted to that fear drip. And when it's not there, they don't know what to do, and they'll create it if they have to. And it's unfortunate, but remembering to kind of come down from all of that every once in a while, going out and touching grass, talk to someone outside of it, right? Get a different look, have a conversation that's not about all of these things, right? Throw on a sitcom, mindlessly, unplug from it for a while. Whatever
Mhm.
you need to do, whatever works for you, just to quite literally unplug from it, because we're going to have to be able to keep our wits about us and our energy up, because everything we've been talking about coming is happening now. And what was our mission that we spoke so poetically about leading up to now, was to be, an anchor for people, to be support for people. That we can't do if we don't have that balance within ourselves. So if you have to take the time each week to unplug from it and balance yourself, do that.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And also managing expectations. I think we have such a um add water, instant gratification mindset as Westerners, that we really feel like, well, this is what I've decided and now it should be this way now. And so the idea of actually working for something or meditating on something and really kind of taking the time to allow something to develop, I think that's an art that really needs to be cultivated. And we need to focus more on that than uh this, 5-second shots and clips that were given in videos or in movies that kind of overwhelm our brains. And being in this constant dopamine uh place where dopamine is not really about satisfying the urge, it's about the anticipation of that satisfaction. So if your life is always on this edge of always anticipating the next stimuli, then you're doing such a disservice to your adrenal glands, to your energy, to your body, that I think we're it just perpetuates that state of fear because the anxiety energy has been so ramped up that we're just living in this kind of constant buzz, as opposed to just being kind of peaceful and letting yourself rest a little bit. And it is so salient what you said about going outside and touching grass, because what the world is showing me on social media is maybe 1 millionth of a percent of what reality truly is. But if I perceive that as reality, when I go outside, the way I engage with the world is going to be different than if I had never seen any of that stuff and I didn't think any of those things were happening. So I don't think there's a civil war happening. This is an agenda that's being pushed here in our country, that we're going to have a civil war, that, the 3 million people who have come across the border illegally, now merging with the 11 million that are already here, that somehow there's going to be some massive uprising. Now, what does that serve me again to get totally freaked out about this and upset and scared and rape and pillage and the world's going to blow up? And I just sometimes I just say, well, okay, let's table that and let's come back to this tomorrow and see if any of those things happened. And if they didn't, okay, well, let's table it and let's go another day and see if any of those things have happened. But I'm preparing mentally. I'm like, I'm sturdy. I could probably go 3 months without eating. I'd be okay. Like, I could make it. Could drink my own pee. I'm down, whatever. I should probably start practicing now, though. Not right now, but in general.
On air. Pardon.
I think it should be live on air for sure. I mean, you don't have to, we could blur it out or whatever, but
One woman, one cup.
I
Screen
just,
concert didn't happen.
I just like bring a cup out of nowhere. Just
Hey man,
produce.
it's been working for David Wilcock for a long time apparently, so we should. But yeah, like, I agree with you. And one thing about, the Civil War is whether or not it's inevitable doesn't change the fact that there's nothing you can do about it. And there's not a lot you can do to prepare for something like that. That's the one thing that people don't quite understand is, especially with a civil war, it would be different than a war happening in your country, like say you were in Afghanistan and a truck attacked you. That's a different thing than neighbors turning on neighbors, because there is no preparing for that. You have no idea where the borders are going to be. There's no clear cut us versus them, right? And
It's
yeah.
all going to be online, though.
Oh, don't
It's
you know?
all gonna be on fucking line. There won't be you won't see your neighbor will just have blocked you on Instagram. You just won't realize.
So would be the joke that it can't happen simply because nobody's going to go outside for it. Everyone's going to
Exactly.
watch it from their living room and be like, "Oh yeah, get him!" But it's like,
Exactly.
there's like 3 people that are actually fighting because
They're just angry tweeting. That's all it is.
But the media will make it seem much more intense.
Oh, exactly. They'll just
Yeah.
deploy Weta like from Lord of the Rings and blow it up so it looks like there's, yeah, absolutely. Why not? I should probably let you guys go, but before we do that, why don't you tell them where you can find a little bit about your podcast and where they can find you guys?
You can find us at themeltpodcast.net, and you can get to most avenues of where we are active on the internet from that website. We are on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, Telegram, Rumble. Yes.
Carrier
Patreon,
pigeon.
locals, carrier pigeon. Yeah. So just about everything melt centric you can find there in the Meltiverse.
You can usually find me wandering through the woods somewhere. Aimlessly.
Are these the metaphorical woods or the real?
No, legit. The
Okay.
real.
So when you say that you're going on a 3-hour walk, you're really just going on a 3-hour wander.
I usually go into the woods
A
and just
ramble.
walk in a circle for 3 hours and come home.
That's what I
Circumnambulate.
call wandering. It's not quite
Exactly.
aimless because
Yeah.
your aim is to wander. So
Exactly. Aimful.
Yes.
Thanks for having us on, Shane. It was
Yes.
fun.
definitely good to
See you.
catch up with you guys, and we'll say bye to everybody at home.
Yes.
Yes.
Farewell.